On a cold winter's day in January 1977, what began as an escape from justice took a dark turn. It became a terrifying ordeal for an innocent family living in Pottery Cottage, a converted 18th century pottery barn near the Peak District. The lives of the Moran and Minton families, once filled with the simple joys of rural life, were shattered by the arrival of a man with nothing left to lose. William Thomas Hughes, otherwise known as Billy, armed and dangerous, would take this family hostage, setting the stage for a series of tragic events that would forever scar the memory of those who survived and horrify the nation. In this video, we'll delve into the life of Billy Hughes and the gruesome crimes he committed against a blameless family, now infamously known as the Pottery Cottage murders. Much of the research for this video comes from Carol Ann Lee's book, The Pottery Cottage Murders. The book dives deeply into the lives of the Moran and Minton families, covering details that I couldn't fit into this video. Now, let's lift the thin veil. Born on August 8, 1946, in Preston, Lancashire, Billy was the oldest of 6 children. His parents, Thomas and Mary Hughes, both worked manual jobs, but did okay for themselves in terms of money. They had a very strict but loving relationship with all of their children. Billy showed little interest in his schooling and performed poorly, often absconding and not showing up to his classes for several days. By the age of 12, he had developed a reputation for being quick to react aggressively to situations before looking for other ways to resolve issues. At school, Billy was often teased for his short stature, and he often responded by threatening or getting into fights with his bullies. Billy had his first run-in with the law when he was just 15. By then, he was already known in his neighborhood for stealing from shops and people's homes. On one occasion, he got caught stealing motorcycles, for which he'd have to pay a fine of 7 shillings and 6 pence, which would be valued at around £12 today. After dropping out of school at the age of 15, he was not able to maintain a job for any length of time. Billy spent periods in approved schools and, eventually, in 1964, in Borstal as a result of his increasing criminal behavior. An approved school was a type of residential institution in the United Kingdom to which young people could be sent by a court, usually for committing offences, but sometimes because they were deemed to be beyond parental control. For the sake of simplicity, you could say an approved school was a boarding school, whereas a borstal was a type of youth detention centre run by the prison service to reform young offenders. It was during his years in Borstal that he'd gain a reputation for falling in love with lifting weights and becoming immensely strong. By 1966, he was given the first of several jail terms. Going to jail for thievery, assaulting people, and drink driving would become a common thing for Billy. But what's fascinating is the number of chances he was given, even though most of his crimes featured some sort of violence, so much so that he eventually acquired the moniker Mad Billy. In October 1971, Billy met a woman called Jean Naden, a Blackpool native, who was staying in the halfway house he spent some time in after a prison release. By August 1972, the couple had a daughter, Nicola, a little sister to Jean's other daughter from a previous relationship, 5-year-old Tracy. The family lived near Blackpool's Golden Mile at first, but moved around a lot, partly because Billy didn't want to pay the rent that landlords demanded. Even on the rare occasions he had the money. Although Billy was given several opportunities to work in his family's businesses, he squandered them by not showing up to work, stealing property, or getting into fights or threatening people. As time went on, the relationship between Billy and Jean turned neglectful and cruel. Billy was in and out of prison, but his violence was not limited to people outside his home. Jean barely saw him at all for weeks at a time, but those were the good times. Due to his attitude towards work, Billy would only have money on the occasions that he had sold drugs or goods he had stolen from house or business break-ins. Perpetually being without money made him extremely angry, and he started to take his anger out on Jean mostly, but also 5-year-old Tracy, and sometimes Nicola. 3 days after Nicola was born, Billy beat Jean senseless and threatened to throw Tracy into the fireplace. Another occasion was when Jean made Billy dinner, but the dish was not up to his standards. He erupted and destroyed the dishes laid out at the dinner table and smashed Jean's head against the floorboards. When she ran out of the house trying to escape, he stood at an upper floor window screaming her name and dangling baby Nicola out of the window, threatening to drop her if Jean didn't come back, which she did. Since Billy often used her children to control her, Jean had little choice but to obey him. Keep in mind, there was not much protection available to women and their children from violent men like Billy at that time. It was still an era when hysteria was considered a diagnosable disease for women. In 1973, Billy was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison after being convicted of 4 counts of assault causing actual bodily harm. The charges stemmed from an incident where 2 police officers stopped his car and discovered a cache of drugs in the boot. Billy violently resisted arrest, assaulting the 2 officers and 2 others who joined after a brief chase. During this sentence, he married Jean on February 18, 1974. According to many who knew her, she was forced into the marriage. A couple of months after his release, by February 1976, Billy had set his sights on another woman, Teresa O'Doherty, who he moved in with in March 1976. This was Jean's ticket out of the abusive relationship, and she eventually moved with the children into a council house in Blackpool. Unfortunately, this would not give them the peace they desperately needed. Billy started to drink and gamble heavily, and whenever he'd lose, he'd blame Jean and would still regularly drop by her house and beat her and Tracy. On Easter 1976, Jean was feeling very insecure and decided to invite her friend Alice to stay with her for a few nights. Billy had a pattern of attacking on holidays or any time he'd been drinking excessively. With Alice and a female tenant she was subletting to, Jean felt safer and more confident. But at around 3 in the morning, when everyone was tucked in bed after a night of celebration, Billy broke into the house. He closed Alice, Jean, and the children off into a room upstairs and took the female tenant downstairs to force himself upon her. After he was done with her, he went back upstairs with an axe and told Jean, "You're going to see your best mate cut up," before swinging the wooden axe handle multiple times into Alice's face. The children witnessed the entire thing, shouting and crying along with Jean. It was utter chaos. But then, in an instant, Billy stopped just short of killing Alice. He took her to the bathroom and tended to her wounds. Although he didn't physically harm anyone else that night, he did not allow them to leave for over 2 hours. After Alice was finally able to report the incident to the police, Billy received just a 10-month suspended sentence for these crimes. This meant that Billy was allowed back into society immediately. Not long after that, in July 1976, ostensibly as part of a plan to turn over a new leaf, Billy decided to relocate to Chesterfield with his girlfriend, Teresa, and start a new life. But that's the exact opposite of what would happen. On the evening of August the 21st, 1976, Billy was drinking in a pub called Jingles, where he met a young couple. The woman wanted to go dancing, so the couple ended their chat with Billy and left. They didn't notice when he followed them. Their route led through a small park, and this is where Billy attacked, beating the man senseless with a brick and forcing himself upon the woman at knife point at a nearby riverbank off Queen's Park and Markham Road. Extensive house-to-house inquiries and interviews with members of the local community were conducted, while police appealed to anyone in the area of interest between 2:30 and 3:45 in the morning to come forward. The press reproduced an artist's impression of the rapist, believed to be around 26 years old, 5 foot 7 inches, of broad build, with short, dark brown hair and long sideburns, wearing a white or cream shirt, black or dark green trousers, and black shoes with Cuban heels. Upon seeing the photo of it, Teresa recognized the face as her boyfriend's, but she later claimed it was not her that approached the police. According to reports, the authorities received an anonymous tip from someone who was reportedly close to Billy, and on August 27th, Billy was taken into custody, charged, and placed under remand in HMP Leicester. Guards at the prison described Billy as mostly unremarkable and run-of-the-mill. The complete record of his prior convictions, as well as a report indicating that he was of a violent nature and could try to escape, did not reach HMP Leicester until after his escape and the events that followed. Over the period of the next few months, Billy would make several trips to Blackpool and Chesterfield magistrates' courts to be remanded for further crimes. At first, he wrote to Teresa frequently from prison, but she broke up with him soon after he was imprisoned and moved house without informing him, leaving his letters to her unanswered. Despite his record of violent behavior, Billy was classified as a Category B prisoner, which basically meant a prisoner for whom the very highest conditions of security are not necessary, but for whom escape must be made very difficult. While Billy was remanded at HMP Leicester, he was assigned to work in the kitchen. This gave Billy access to a lot of things prisoners would likely not have today, such as a vast array of kitchen knives. It's worth noting that Billy would not have been eligible for kitchen duties if his complete profile was given to HMP Leicester on time. On December the 3rd, 1976, Billy was due at Chesterfield Magistrates Court to be remanded further. Just before he was due to leave, the catering office notified the security department that a 7.5-inch boning knife had gone missing from the kitchen. The details of what follows are slightly inconsistent, but I've done my best to confirm this series of events. Every time Billy changed out of his kitchen uniform into his prison uniform or civilian clothing, he'd be frisked. A prison guard would run his fingers around the collar, any outer clothing, such as jackets or sweaters, and the inside and outside of legs and pockets. It's reported that Billy was searched, but nothing was found. The catering office rang the security department later asking if the knife had been found, and the security department confirmed that it had been, but that they would have to wait a couple of days to get it back because the officer responsible for returning it was on sick leave. The knife was never returned. A later investigation revealed that there was only ever one record made about the missing knife, which simply stated that it was missing and never found. The cells weren't searched. A full-scale search of the entire prison was refused by the prison governor, which is the equivalent to a warden in the United Kingdom. Just after 7 a.m. on January the 12th, 1977, the day Billy was due at Chesterfield Magistrates Court, he made a call to Teresa, as he believed she was going to be a character witness for him. But he still couldn't help but threaten her. He told her that she had better not bring anyone with her, and that he had managed to get a hold of her new address by conning a directory inquiries lady into giving it to him. Teresa flatly refused to be his character witness and told Billy that their relationship was over and he should go back to his wife and children and leave her alone. She hung up on his appeals that she was all he had in the world, and he reportedly screamed, "You f***ing bitch, you'd better lock your f***ing doors tonight." Billy was driven out of Leicester later that morning in a prison taxi van. Parts of the country had been hit with a major blizzard and driving was next to impossible, leading to severe disruptions on the 55-mile trip to the court. Donald Sprintall and Kenneth Simmons, two prison guards, and the driver, David Reynolds, accompanied Billy to Chesterfield. After Billy was frisked and handcuffed, Sprintall occupied the front passenger seat next to Reynolds, and in the back, Billy was shackled to Simmons by one hand, with the other hand free. On the way, Billy asked to stop at an approaching truck services station to use the bathroom. The guards initially refused him, but after Billy threatened to soil the car seats, they stopped. Billy was uncuffed and allowed to enter the cubicle by himself, where he likely moved the knife he'd stolen months earlier from his boots to somewhere more accessible, likely close to his groin. Upon returning to the car, he was cuffed to Simmons again, but the relatively routine drive wouldn't last long. Billy stabbed Simmons in the throat, then Sprintall in the back of the neck, very close to his spine. He ordered the guards who were severely injured but alive to give him the keys to the handcuffs and made the van driver drive at knife point for a short distance on the A617 before kicking them all out and taking possession of the car. The driver and critically injured guards were eventually helped by a passerby, the manager of what was then the Red Lion pub, located on the side of the road near where they had been left. An ambulance and the police were called, and an hour later, the stolen car was found abandoned. The Peak District is a vast and often remote area in England, known for its rugged landscapes and isolated moorlands. It's a place where nature feels both beautiful and harsh, with valleys and hills that can seem endless. Billy Moor, part of this region, is a particularly bleak and desolate stretch of land where the isolation is almost palpable. Scaling the hilly landscape of Billy Moor, Billy walked an odd path to throw the police dogs off his scent. He spent several hours walking, climbing, and swimming through the whiteout blizzard until a building consisting of 3 conjoined houses suddenly appeared before him. It was Pottery Cottage, where Billy would commit more gruesome crimes. As Billy ventured inside, he stepped into a large garden and courtyard. In one corner was an open shed with 2 axes hanging up, as if for him to take. He found his way into the houses through a back door and encountered an elderly Amy Minton in the kitchen peeling potatoes for dinner. Shocked and silent, she looked up at disheveled Billy, armed with an axe in each hand, as he stared at her with an unsettling smile and said, "I'm wanted by the police, but I'm not going to hurt you. Tell me, who lives here?" At around 10 in the morning, police received word of Billy's escape. An hour later, they found the prison taxi that Billy had hijacked. Chief Inspector Peter Hughes oversaw the initial search. The roads were mostly empty because of the severe weather, so no one was around to witness the incident itself. The police dogs at the scene were unable to detect any scent, and any tracks had already been covered by a thick layer of snow. Without delay, a search radius was created to include remote local houses, farms, and outbuildings. Since there weren't enough personnel at first to thoroughly inspect every home in the region, authorities concentrated on the most vulnerable, checking 256 of them in the first several hours, without success. The investigators believed that Billy would head towards Beeley to get back on the A6 motorway and stay away from the vast, open moors due to the extreme weather. But as we've come to know, Billy did exactly the opposite and ended up at Pottery Cottage. Pottery Cottage, located on North End Farm in Eastmoor, just 5 miles from Chesterfield near the Peak District National Park, was home to 2 families. On one end lived the Moran and Minton families, 72-year-old retired grocer Arthur Minton, his 68-year-old wife Amy, who worked part-time as a cleaner, their 38-year-old daughter Gillian Moran, a secretary, her 36-year-old husband Richard, a sales director, and their adopted 10-year-old daughter, Sarah. The other end of the cottage was occupied by 2 teachers, Leonard and Joyce Newman. The middle section of the building was empty. When Arthur Minton found his wife talking to Billy in the kitchen, the intruder struck him to the floor with the blunt end of an axe. Billy said, "The police want me. I need to stay here until it's dark. If you do as I say, everything will be all right." After helping Arthur back up, Billy reassured him, "Do as I say, and it will be all right." "How many people live here?" Arthur was physically and mentally trying to resist Billy's intrusion, not wanting to cooperate and trying to defend his family. This attitude would not sit well with Billy, who managed to glean from Arthur that Richard and Gillian were out at work and Sarah was at school, along with what time they would be home. Billy then forced the couple to give him a tour of the house with his axe brandished, making sure to disconnect the phones. Gillian was the next one home, and Amy met her at the door. "Don't panic, Jill, but there's a man here with a knife. He's hiding from the police. Keep calm. He won't hurt us," she told her. When Sarah walked in after school, they told her, so as not to scare her, that Billy was just a man who needed help because his car had broken down. The family sat around, tense, smoking cigarettes, drinking tea, and making forced small talk with Billy until at around 6 p.m., Richard arrived home. As soon as he heard Richard at the door, Billy grabbed Gillian and put a knife to her throat. "Don't come near me, or I'll kill her," Billy screamed. Immediately, Richard threw his car keys over to Billy, telling him to take the car and they would not tell anyone. But Billy had the entire family scared and under his control at this point. He walked around the house cutting off insulated cables from various appliances and rope, which he used to tie everyone up. Richard was tied first, then Gillian, then Amy. Arthur resisted physically because Sarah distracted Billy by screaming, "Don't you hurt my mummy and daddy. Don't you dare. Get out. You hurt people." But Billy was extremely strong and easily subdued and tied everyone up, gagged them, and sat them on chairs, then moved each person to a different room in the house, anchored to any available fixture. This is where Billy's games of mental and physical torture began. Gillian was held captive in her marital bedroom, Amy in Sarah's bedroom, Richard in a spare room with 2 single beds, Sarah in her grandparents' bedroom, and Arthur in the parlor below. Gillian quickly suspected that her father was being beaten when she heard noises from the lounge below, but Billy would not allow anyone to see him. After feeding tea to the rest of his captives, he went to Gillian's room and tried to force himself upon her. When she told him she was on her period, he coerced her into relieving him another way. Gillian made Billy promise that he wouldn't hurt Sarah, and he claimed that because he had a little girl of his own called Nicola, he couldn't harm another little girl. After that, he went to Richard's room to brag about how many people he's beaten up and how many houses he's robbed. While this was happening, Gillian could see from the window that her neighbor was outside with his dog, but there wasn't much she could do about it tied up and gagged. Any noise would alert Billy, which could mean that he'd hurt her family. The police decided to stop the search for Billy due to the lack of light and extremely hazardous weather conditions. The family spent the night bound and gagged. The next morning, on January the 13th, 1977, the blizzard continued and so did the police search. But because the houses in the area were so scattered, it was taking a while to visit each place of residence or business. Billy woke Gillian up because, unexpectedly, at around 7:30 that morning, a council truck pulled into the Moran family driveway. It was there to empty the septic tank. Billy asked Gillian to go outside, but to not say anything and to act normal. She signed their form and they began to leave. Gillian waited on the doorstep, exhausted, as the two men got into their truck and drove away. As badly as she wanted to say or do something, to scribble that one word across the paperwork and ask for aid, she knew that Billy was watching from a window and would have known if the driver or his companion had responded with shock. Furthermore, she could not have imagined the repercussions that would have followed. Gillian did take this time to peek inside the parlor and noticed that Arthur wasn't moving. She saw something dark running from his neck down to his body. Billy wouldn't let her check on her father. Instead, he instructed her to call in sick to work and report Sarah sick to school so no one would get suspicious. All Gillian could think about was her father and daughter, but she did as she was told. She asked Billy why Sarah hadn't asked for the comfort blanket and teddy she's been sleeping with since she was an infant. Billy simply responded that she just didn't want them, before agreeing to take the items to where she was. Billy instructed Richard also to call his employers, Brett Plastics, but they were suspicious and later said that he sounded extremely odd and not like his cheery self. A few people from his office called back to check if everything was okay and if he needed anything, but Richard refused. The aroused suspicions made Billy extremely angry and he started to hit Richard. Meanwhile, Gillian was sent out to a nearby store in her car to pick up newspapers and cigarettes. He warned her that her family would deal with the consequences if she told anyone anything, and she promised she wouldn't. That morning, the copy of Derbyshire Times she picked up ran the front page headline, "Dangerous hijacker still free despite Moorland hunt. Hostage fear among police theories." Gillian managed to drive to the store and pick up what Billy had asked for, even making small talk with some locals in the store before she returned. "I personally can't imagine what I would be thinking in a situation like that, where I know my loved ones are being held hostage by a violent criminal and I'm unable to ask for help." When she returned home, she noticed the chair her father had previously been in was empty and covered with sheets. Sarah had not been seen by anyone in the family either. Before Gillian could ask about her father and daughter, Billy dragged her to a bedroom and sexually assaulted her once again. Afterwards, in a peculiar turn of events, Billy released Amy and Richard from their restraints and, along with Gillian, insisted they'll sit, drink whiskey, chat, and play cards together. Gillian was not tied at this point. This temporary freedom, along with the alcohol loosening everyone up, seemed to be an attempt to create a false sense of security, as Billy ended up tying Amy and Richard again soon after. Throughout the card game, Billy was notably evasive and increasingly aggressive whenever Gillian asked about her father and daughter's whereabouts, exacerbating her anxiety about their well-being. After the card game, Billy ordered Gillian to make burgers and chips for the entire family. He said he would take Arthur and Sarah's plates to them. Gillian, still hoping that her father was safe, noticed that the food she had prepared for him was brought back to the kitchen by Billy. He told her Arthur simply wasn't hungry. The empty plate belonging to Sarah gave Gillian the impression Sarah was still alive. But this was not something she wanted to confirm with Billy, in case it would make him aggressive and lead him to retaliate. The lack of transparency and honesty from Billy only further increased the family's distress and heightened the tension in the already volatile situation. At this point, Gillian's main concern was getting Billy out of the house, encourage him to leave and go somewhere else. This would help protect the rest of her family and then she could find out about her father. After reading in the papers that the police were canvassing the area, with Gillian and Richard's assistance, Billy started to make an escape plan for about 7:30 that evening. He tried to time his escape with the extremely bad weather because he heard on the radio the police were unable to carry on with the search. He went for a test run in Richard's Chrysler 180 with Richard and Gillian, and then just Gillian in an unsuccessful attempt to collect some money owed to him by a friend. When he did try to escape, the weather made it impossible, and he returned to the house, planning to try again later. But the snowfall was so bad that Billy decided to stay another night. The family and Billy would go to sleep for the night in separate rooms, but when Gillian would ask if Sarah could sleep with her, saying she must be frightened, Billy refused. Meanwhile, on January the 13th, the police intensified their search efforts. Around 200 officers, supported by 2 British Army helicopters, were dispatched to the area between the crashed taxi on the B5057 and the A6 road. Given the severe weather conditions, the police believed that Billy was likely seeking refuge in someone's home. They conducted house-to-house checks within a designated search radius. However, the Pottery Cottage was just 200 yards outside of this radius, placing them beyond the police's immediate focus. Unfortunately, the search was halted early that evening due to worsening weather conditions. The following morning on January the 14th, Billy told Gillian to make breakfast for everyone, still asking for a plate for Arthur and Sarah. Billy then dispatched Richard and Gillian to Chesterfield to buy supplies he needed for his escape, such as food, cigarettes, a camping gas stove, and fuel. He handed Gillian £25 he had stolen from the couple earlier and instructed her to buy a present for Sarah while they were out. The pair had no choice but to comply with Billy's demands, fearing for their own safety and that of their family. As they ventured out to purchase the supplies, their thoughts were consumed by concern for Sarah, whose fate was still unknown, and the gravity of the dangerous situation they found themselves in. Richard contemplated telling the police, but Gillian pushed back, saying that would risk everyone's lives. The couple purchased all the items Billy requested, including an Enid Blyton book for Sarah, as she loved to read, and returned to Pottery Cottage, even stopping once to make small talk with a friend while they refueled the car. Billy spent much of that evening preparing to escape. At about 6 p.m., he announced that he was ready to leave, but needed one more thing: money. After ransacking the family home and not finding much cash, he asked Richard whether his place of work stored any cash. Richard told him that it did, so he and Gillian were forced to drive Billy to Brett Plastics, where he stole what would be approximately equivalent to £1,350 today. They then drove back to Pottery Cottage to drop Richard off and tie up and gag the surviving family members. Billy then took Gillian as a hostage, saying that she would be released to return home and free once he had driven a reasonable distance from the property. Billy and Gillian drove for several miles and got as far as Chesterfield when Billy suddenly started shouting about going back because he'd forgotten the map he needed. Gillian turned the car around and pleaded to come in with Billy so she could see Sarah. Billy refused this, and for a very dark reason. He told her that he was going to change into one of Richard's suits, but unbeknownst to Gillian, he would stab Amy and Richard to death. Gillian panicked, and in an almost delirious state, switched off the ignition and stood outside, smoking a cigarette. Upon Billy's return, they got back into the car, and when Billy tried to turn it on, it failed to start. Billy forced Gillian to go outside and tried to flag down passing cars for a tow, but she was unsuccessful. He then told her to go to her next-door neighbors for help. Leonard Newman was shocked to see Gillian's disheveled state and asked what he could do for her. Gillian responded by asking for a tow, but when Leonard asked where Richard was, Gillian whispered, "He's tied up in a chair, you know." Initially, he thought that Gillian had been drinking, but she pretended to laugh and patted him on his shoulder like he had told her a funny joke, and whispered, "It's the man from the moors. He's listening. He'll kill us all." Leonard understood, but their home did not have a landline. He went inside and quickly came up with a plan with his wife Joyce that he would tow Billy and Gillian, while Joyce went out to the nearest telephone box to call the police. But Joyce quickly got into the car and screeched out of her driveway, making Billy extremely suspicious. Billy was angrily yelling at Gillian for telling the Newmans when suddenly Amy Minton emerged, badly hurt and covered in blood. Amy had climbed through an open window and she was trying to walk towards the car. She fell down before reaching it. Gillian couldn't believe it. She saw her wounded mother walk very slowly towards the car and then fall over into a snowbank, which stained red after a few minutes. Billy grabbed Gillian, saying they needed to run away. They went to another neighbor's house. Ronald Frost was a mechanic and was told that Billy was just Richard's friend. Billy asked Frost to help tow the car to get it started. Frost agreed, but he eventually figured out that Gillian was being held against her will. He tried to work slowly on purpose to buy them some time while his wife, Madge, called the police from their house. Soon after, Frost got the car engine working. Billy, with Gillian still held hostage in the car, then quickly drove away towards Baslow. The Chrysler was seen driving very fast on the A619 road. Many police cars started chasing it, and a big, fast pursuit across Derbyshire ensued, continuing into Cheshire. During the chase, an unmarked police car cut in front of Billy's path, causing him to swerve and crash into a wall. 2 police officers got out and ran towards him, but Billy, having Gillian at knife point, threatened to kill her if they came any closer. He pulled Gillian out of the car and forced the police officers to give him their car. Then he quickly sped away from the crash site. The police chase lasted till about 10 p.m. A bus had been placed across the road in the village of Reno to block Billy's path. When he tried to avoid the bus, he lost control of the car, which spun around, mounted the curb, hit a street sign, and then crashed into a stone wall. Police quickly surrounded the car with their vehicles, but still not ready to be caught, Billy held an axe over Gillian's head and threatened to kill her. He demanded that a car be parked next to his, facing in the direction he wanted to go, and that he be allowed safely to escape. As police with guns got ready, Chief Inspector Peter House talked with Billy. House even offered to switch places with Gillian as a hostage. During the standoff, police gave Billy a car to escape in, but Gillian, who was in shock by this point, wouldn't move. After about 50 minutes of negotiations, Billy had lost his patience. He yelled, "Right, your time's up," as he swung the axe at Gillian's head. House jumped towards them, partially deflecting the blow that still gashed Gillian's forehead. Simultaneously, Officer Frank Pell fired a shotgun that glanced off Billy's skull. Billy then struck House's arm with the axe as Gillian cowered against the car door. While biting House's arm deeply and attempting to hit Gillian again, 3 more shots were fired by the police squad. The final shot, fired by Officer Alan Nichols, entered Billy's shoulder, passing through a major artery and killing him. Billy's body then fell across Gillian's lap, ending the violent confrontation. During the pursuit, police were alerted to the hostage situation at Pottery Cottage by Leonard and Joyce Newman. Uncertain whether Billy Hughes was still inside the house, police deployed numerous officers and marksmen to strategic locations around the area, with some arriving at the cottage just before 9 p.m. Upon entering the property, they discovered a grim scene. Amy Minton's body was in the garden, partially covered in snow and lying face up. Inside the house, they found the bodies of Richard and Sarah Moran and Arthur Minton, all of whom had died from shock and blood loss due to multiple stab wounds to their throats and chests. Richard was found tied up and face down on the landing. Sarah was curled up in the fetal position on her grandparents' bedroom floor, and Arthur was downstairs, his arms bound behind his back and concealed under a white overcoat. Evidence at the scene indicated that although Billy had tried to convince Amy, Gillian, and Richard that Arthur and Sarah were still alive during their captivity, they had likely been killed either on the night of January the 12th or early the following day. On March the 10th, 1977, Chief Inspector Gordon Fowler of the Prison Service released a report detailing how Billy Hughes managed to escape from prison. The report sharply criticized HMP Leicester for its inadequate search procedures after the convict stole a knife, emphasizing the need for strip searches before transferring prisoners. Additionally, it highlighted the failure of the police to properly inform the prison about Billy's dangerous nature. Fowler made 17 recommendations to address these issues, all of which were accepted by the government. Despite the serious lapses, no individual was punished, as the failures were deemed systemic rather than personal. The police were also criticised for their narrow search focus, as they concentrated on routes leading to Lancashire, believing Billy would head that way. They overlooked Pottery Cottage because nothing about it particularly stood out, and it fell outside their search radius. The tragic events that followed marked the first instance in Derbyshire where police fatally shot a suspect, and the first time British police killed an escaped armed prisoner. After being rescued, Gillian repeatedly inquired about her family's well-being, but was only informed of their deaths after receiving medical treatment. Her family's funeral took place on January the 21st, 1977, with over 100 people in attendance. To avoid media attention, Gillian was escorted by police, along with her sister, Barbara, switching cars en route. On the same day, Billy's ex-girlfriend, Teresa O'Doherty, gave a public interview expressing her wish that she had been the one harmed instead of Gillian's family. Due to public outrage, the government had to make special arrangements for Billy's funeral. They faced strong local protests over plans to bury him in Chesterfield, including threats to exhume his body. Consequently, he was cremated instead. Gillian later sold her story to the Daily Mail, which was published in February 1977, but she never spoke to the media about it again. She remarried in 1978 and had a daughter in 1980. However, her new marriage was troubled, with her husband struggling to cope with her emotional leads, eventually leading to his imprisonment in 1987 for threatening someone with a gun. 3 months after the murders, Gillian personally thanked Superintendent House for saving her life. In 2017, Alan Nichols, the officer who shot Billy, was posthumously awarded a Bravery Award, which his family accepted. Thank you for listening. Please make sure you're subscribed and you leave your thoughts down below.